Good morning. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for making such a big effort. We've got people from Luton, you're really welcome, from the airport, we've got police officers, social workers, charity workers, Andrew Selous, who's an MP, local politicians, Optimists. Optimists are a group of women who advocate for children's and women's rights. And I'm just so grateful that you're all here because it sends a big message back to Parliament. Andrew is going to see the Immigration Minister, Mark Harper, and tell him what's going on today. And it sends a message that we believe that human trafficking is not acceptable and we're prepared to do something about it. So thank you so much. Thank you also to the King's Arms Trust for giving us this room today, and Bedford Borough Council for paying for the coffee and cake. So you'll be glad to know that your taxes do go to something decent every now and then. If you wouldn't mind turning your phones off, that would be really helpful. Fire exits are straight out the back of the doors, out the way that you came, and onto the grass on the right-hand side. Toilets, if you need them, if you come out of the left-hand door there, down this corridor, men's are on the right and ladies on the left. And there's also a breastfeeding room before you get to the toilet, in case anyone needs it. Can't see any babies, but just check. And this morning, our speakers are Andrew Selous MP, who's South Bedfordshire MP, who sits on the Interparliamentary Board for Human Trafficking. And I'm just so grateful for his passion and his encouragement of me, actually. He said, yeah, go for it, you really should do this. And also for Jerry Ilford, who is the Operations Director for forJustice, which is a charity that actually goes in and rescues people. They're doing the job. And so it's great to have somebody who is from an organisation on the ground who knows what they're talking about. And then Detective Chief Inspector David Sestaro, who's our own Bedfordshire Police's lead on human trafficking. And also we have Lifebox Theatre Company, who are going to speak to us today about real life events that have taken place. And so you'll have a drama at the beginning and the end. And we'll then finish with questions to the panel. So we'll have a few of the speakers come and sit, and you can ask them anything you like. Just to say as well that when we're dealing with a subject like human trafficking, it sometimes can bring up memories for us from the past or memories from the present, or that have been times when we've felt that we haven't got a voice or we've been unable to defend ourselves. Because of that, I've asked an independent counselling group to be at the back at the end. If you have anything that comes up, please do go and talk to them, because I think as we look after ourselves, we look after other people better who we serve. So yeah, we'll start now with Lifebox Theatre.
My daughter was born with a rare skeletal disorder. it affected the development of her bones. So as she got older, it became more apparent that one of her arms was shorter than the other. "Oh, I feel so ugly, Mum. No lad's ever going to fancy me." That's what she used to say to me. Oh, I thought she was beautiful. Well, she never went anywhere without a jacket, no matter how warm the weather was. So I really felt like we were getting somewhere when she became a majorette. She took part in competitions all over the country, and I had never seen her so happy as when she won first prize at a holiday camp. She was just like a normal teenager in every other way. She was great at school, she loved sport, she went out with her mates, but she was always home on time. And yes, occasionally I'd find out that she'd had a drop of cider or something, and I'd ground her for it. But I mean, that's living with teenagers, isn't it? Then one Friday, July 2005, she just didn't come home. She was 13. "See you then, Mum," she'd said. 10 o'clock came and went. By 11:30, I was phoning around her mates, and eventually I called the police. It was the worst night of my life, and we spent the whole of the next day looking for her, and eventually I got a phone call and the police had found her with her friend Gemma. Now, Gemma was in foster care, and so Jessica used to take care of her because the other girls used to pick on her, you know. I mean, Jessica was just like that. So I grounded her for it, as you would, but the next day she'd gone again, and so had Gemma. So I telephoned the police again, and on the Tuesday morning I get a knock on my door. And it's two police women saying they believe that Jessica is being sexually exploited by a group of Asian men. Well, the next few months, life just became like a nightmare. I mean, she would come in with these presents of jewellery, perfume, mobile phones, but she wouldn't tell me where they'd come from. And when I tried to find out, she'd tell me to F off. She was running wild at school by then, suspended twice. It was as if school just did not exist for her anymore. And she would come home with bruises and love bites. She stopped washing. She just stopped caring. And within 3 months, I literally did not know her anymore. She became the #1 missing person in the county. 90 times I called the police. 90 times. That's how many times she ran away. And they'd find her all over the place. Grass verges where she'd been dumped by these men and fallen asleep. Once she was found on the hard shoulder of the motorway. She'd been drugged and passed around a group of men and... Well, when the police arrested her for the umpteenth time and told me that they'd found her with ecstasy tablets, that is when I knew for sure that she was on drugs. And the worst thing for a parent is not being able to control or protect your daughter. I mean, you feel like it's your fault, like you've done something.
Saying goodbye to Stefan was incredibly difficult. Stefan's my son. I didn't want to leave him, but I didn't have any choice. I'd thought about moving from Moldova to work in the West, but how would I manage with a small boy? No, staying in Chisinau was the right thing to do. At least my family could take care of Stefan whenever I got a bit of work. But when I couldn't even afford to pay his school registration fee or buy his school uniform, I knew I had to do something. I went to see an old school connection, Katrina. I'd met her a few times. We weren't exactly friends, but she told me about some job opportunities in Italy. I met up with her. She told me I needed to be ready to leave a week later, and that really tested my resolve. But I thought about the fact that I could be back within a year with enough money to make it work. I thought about Stefan. count me in, I told her. When I got to Katrina's flat the following week, I was surprised because I thought it would just be the two of us travelling together, but there were 6 other girls there waiting, all of them under 18. Katrina asked for my passport so she could give it to the guide for safekeeping, and I gave it to her. We were each assigned to one of 3 cars and travelled for several hours while I thought about whether I'd made the right decision. I should be raising my son, but, well, how would he manage without an education? The debate raged inside me, back and forth. Just as we reached the border of Romania, we stopped. We had to grab our bags because we would be changing cars for the next bit of the journey. It was then, for the first time, I sensed that something was wrong because I could see that Katrina wasn't coming with us now. I tried to get her attention. I yelled at her, but she would not look at me. A second later, we were crossing the border into Romania. When we eventually stopped, I had no idea where we were. I could see the lights of a distant village, but the only thing nearby was an old country house. We were ushered into a dimly lit room, and the door was locked behind us. We were told it was because they were having trouble securing visas for us. We were brought simple meals twice a day, and after 7 days, a man came to us and told us that our visas had been approved and we would be leaving for Italy through Serbia. I was happy because they told us that apartments had been found for us so we could start work straight away. But then they told us that although our work visas had been approved for Italy, our tourist visas for Serbia had not been approved. And so we would have to sneak across the border under the cover of dark, on foot. Once we were in Serbia, we were taken to a stone house in what seemed like the middle of a forest. When we went in, we saw other girls looking like us, bloodied and bruised from our trek across the border. A nice lady tended to our cuts and gave us food. She told us we should get some rest because tomorrow would be a big day. In the morning, we were told some important men were waiting to evaluate us. We must undress to the waist so they could see that we were healthy. My protests fell on deaf ears.
Andrew Selous, I'm the MP for South West Bedfordshire, and as Kristy said, I'm an officer of the all-party parliamentary group to combat human trafficking, which, as the name says, is a cross-party group, MPs and members of the House of Lords from all parties and none, who have come together to scrutinise what the government is doing in this area, to learn from best practice from what other countries in Europe are doing to combat human trafficking. And a big thank you from me as well for all of you for turning up. Particular thanks to Cllr Kristy Adams, whose idea this was. She has a remarkable ability to get people together and organise things, and it's fantastic to see so many people here today. I will be coming back to the 6 o'clock session. I'm happy to answer questions after I've spoken. I do have to leave then, unfortunately, because Parliament has been recalled for this afternoon, so I won't be around later on. But as I say, I'm happy to take any questions from you. In particular, if you think there are things that the government could or should be doing, which it isn't doing, or you don't understand things that are being done, I'm very happy to take questions about those issues. If I don't know the answers, I will get the answers from Mark Harper, who's the Minister who deals with this area, and perhaps get them back to Kristy, who could disseminate them out to you. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was a schoolboy, I was told that this country got rid of human trafficking in 1807. One of my great parliamentary heroes, William Wilberforce, finally got the bill to abolish the slave trade through Parliament. It took him 40 years to do that, which I think is a lesson in persistence for all of us. But finally, in 1807, this country outlawed the slave trade. It wasn't, in fact, till 1833 that slavery itself was abolished across the British Empire. So I suppose, like most young people growing up, I thought, tick, job done. well done that Britain was at the front of it, working with others to abolish slavery. And then a couple of years ago, I was at a conference, and someone got up from a similar organisation like forJustice, who are here today. It was the A21 campaign, and said that today there are in fact more people in slavery around the world than there ever have been. Far more than in Wilberforce's day. The last set of figures from the United Nations says that 27 million people worldwide are in some form of slavery or have been trafficked. I actually slightly prefer the term modern slavery for what we're talking about. I noticed on the Hope for Justice leaflet you've got, they talk about slavery as well as human trafficking. I just think modern slavery cuts through perhaps a little bit more clearly with the public than human trafficking. And I'll talk about what happened in my constituency in November 2011, but it was interesting when the BBC reported about that, they chose to use the term slaves. It wasn't me that used that term, that was the term that the BBC used. So is human trafficking modern slavery? Is it something that just happens abroad, a long way away from here, and we don't have to worry about it? Well, as the excellent film showed, no. Is it something that just happens to foreign citizens? Absolutely appalling as that would be, and if it just happened to foreign citizens, it would be absolutely right that we were all here this morning. But no, it isn't. It happens to British citizens as well. And when Bedfordshire police sent in 200 police officers to a small village just south of Leighton Buzzard in my constituency in November 2011, some 19 of the 24 slaves, victims that they freed, were British citizens. Does it just happen in big cities? London, Birmingham, Glasgow, perhaps the bigger cities in Bedfordshire, perhaps just in Luton, just in Bedford? Well, no, it doesn't. Because where was it found in my constituency? In one of the prettiest, smallest, and I say this in the nicest possible sense because it's a village I'm very fond of, but sleepiest villages in my constituency, called Billington, just south of Leighton Buzzard. And as I said, 24 victims of trafficking or victims of modern slavery were liberated by the police. Some of them had been on that traveller site for over 15 years. Now, I had visited that site. I'd gone round it with police officers from Bedfordshire Police, actually looking to see if there were children who were truanting from school a couple of years before. I had been round it, and I didn't know, and obviously the police didn't know, that people were being dreadfully abused and kept in modern slave plantations. People knew about it, and hence it was possible to motivate a fantastic campaign in this country to combat slavery, and it was really public pressure organised by Wilberforce and others that led Parliament finally, after much too long, to take action in 1807, as I said earlier. But today, human trafficking and modern slavery is invisible. And we could pass people in the street. As I said, I went into that traveller's site in Little Billington myself. I didn't see anything wrong. And Bedfordshire Police weren't aware that there was anything wrong. And I think that has huge lessons for us. That's why all of us, all of you in your different professional capacities, whether you're from local authorities, the police, the fire service, the airport, voluntary or community organisations, every single one of you has a role to play professionally. But I think more than that, I think we all have a role to play as individual citizens and as human beings to ask questions when we see things that concern us, that we think might not be right. Now, at Little Billington, the victims were mainly down and outs. They, by and large, had been picked up in homeless hostels in London and elsewhere. One of them was, in fact, a young man who'd grown up in Leighton Buzzard. They're basically people who'd fallen on hard times, who were at a difficult stage in their life, and they had been befriended, told they'd be given board, lodging, £80 a day, an extended family who would look after them. And if you're absolutely on your uppers and life is pretty tough, I guess you'll agree that sounds not a bad deal, doesn't it? So a lot of people fell for it. They went along. Of course, there was no £80 a day. They were kept in horse boxes some of the time. They were given very little food, and they were required to work extremely hard, got up at 5 in the morning and made to work all over the country. Some of them were actually taken out of the country, so they were trafficked from the United Kingdom to work in Sweden for some of the time and other European countries before being brought back to Billington, just south of Leighton Buzzard. When they arrived, their hair was cropped, rather like inmates arriving in concentration camps. They were given a shower once a week on a Friday night. That was because on Saturday mornings, their masters wanted them to be clean and presentable, because that was the morning that they knocked on doors to try and get more work. And they were mainly doing block paving for people's drives. That was their main employment. And the thing that really struck me about that is I just wonder how many of the people who, in good faith, had got those people to come and do block paving for their drives, if they'd really looked at the state and the condition of the people who were doing the work for them, shouldn't they have asked questions? Shouldn't they have said, these people, they don't look right to me, they don't look like normal workers, I don't see them joking, I don't see them laughing, I don't see a normal relationship between the workers and the sort of boss between them. I think something's not right, therefore what do I do? And that, to me, I think, is one of the most important things, which is why I'm really, really pleased that one of the things that Kristy has helped organise with Bedfordshire Police is these little cards giving details of what to do. And I think, Kristy, there are cards for the local authorities and just for members of the public as well. Because I think all of us, when we go about our business, if you're visiting a nail bar, if you're going to a restaurant where perhaps some of the staff are from overseas and live above the restaurant, if you're, in a factory or a warehouse, if you're having, some work done in your garden or your drive block paved, it could be that the people doing that work are under duress, that they have been trafficked. They are, in effect, modern slaves. So that's why this is so important, and that's why this conference is so vital this morning, and why I'm really, really pleased to support it. Let me whiz through just a couple of things that the government is doing in this area. Then, as I said, I'm really happy to take questions from any of the groups here if you think there are more things the government could be doing, or you don't think what we're doing is as effective as it could be. Just starting internationally, the government has ratified the Council of Europe Convention against Trafficking in Human Beings, and we've also opted into a European Union directive on preventing and combating human trafficking, which helps us cooperate and work more effectively with our European Union partners. We passed a further bit of legislation. There was some legislation at the end of the last Parliament, and we passed some more in the Protection of Freedoms Act last year as well, which strengthens some of the slavery anti-trafficking legislation. At the moment, we have the United Kingdom Human Trafficking Centre and the Centre to deal with child exploitation and online protection, CEOP, and UKHTC, and they both come under the Serious Organised Crime Agency, and they will move into the new National Crime Agency, which is being set up later this year to try and coordinate the UK's activity across different organisations. We have the National Referral Mechanism, which is an attempt to get the police, the UK Border Agency as was, it's now sort of been merged back into the Home Office, local authorities and the police, all to share information together about what they believe may be happening as far as human trafficking is concerned in the UK. I understand that 18,000 police officers in the United Kingdom have done an e-learning package to teach them about human trafficking. Some forces have their own human trafficking training. I'd be interested to hear from Bedfordshire Police whether they have their own bespoke learning. Be interested to learn how many Bedfordshire Police officers have actually done that e-learning package. I think we have about 100,000 police in the UK, so we've only got 18,000 that have done that. There's a little bit more to go there, I think, perhaps. The government has given a contract to the Salvation Army to look after adult victims of human trafficking. They came into the Billington site. I think they brought them, actually, the victims initially here to Bedford to look after them and help them reintegrate back into their lives. And there is also, through the Department for Education, a project with Barnardo's to help foster child victims of trafficking. Child victims of trafficking is, I have to admit, an area I don't think we've got quite right. And one of the most worrying things is that some children who've been trafficked and go into local authority protection basically end up being lost in the system and possibly re-trafficked. And it gives me no pleasure to admit that. It's something I don't think governments, the last one, this one, have got on top of, and that is an area I think the local authorities need to do more on. There is a scheme to help victims of human trafficking return to their own countries if that's what they want to do. It's called the Assisted Voluntary Return for Irregular Migrants. And internationally, DFID, the Department for International Development, is working on anti-human trafficking measures in India, Bangladesh and Nepal to try and prevent people being trafficked out of those countries. And we also do some work with Anti-Slavery International. So those are a number of things that the government is doing to try and coordinate its work in this area. But as I said earlier, I do passionately believe it's not just up to the government. This has to be something we do together. Central government, local government, the police, fire service, the airport here, the 5th biggest airport in the UK is Luton, in our county here. Volunteering community groups, churches, and above all, us as individuals and human beings with a moral responsibility to speak out and ask questions. Now, I don't mind if the police get 100 phone calls about people's suspicions about someone who might be in modern slavery, if 98 of those are groundless. Because perhaps just 2 of them, there will be something happening. So what I would say, the thing I believe most passionately is, we've got to be the eyes and the ears of the police. The police cannot do this without us. They need the information. We have to be on their side and we have to help them. I think they will understand and they will bear with us if people, pass through information and there's nothing happening. Far better to make that call and it be groundless than to keep silent and have people in Bedfordshire in modern slavery for 15 years, as happened on the Billington site. Right, I'm going to draw to a close there, but say very happy to take any questions. I'm really sorry I have to go because, as I say, I've got to get back to Parliament after I've taken questions, but I will be coming back to the 6 o'clock session this evening if any of you want to come for a double dose. Kristy.
Would you like to put your hands up if you'd like to ask a question, and I'll bring you a microphone?
You visited Billington, you said 2 years before this became public. How did it become exposed?
Well, I think there had been reports to Bedfordshire Police from members of the public that they thought something funny was going on there. So the police, I guess, were building up their intelligence picture. And understandably, because it was a big operation, they put 200 officers in, they wanted to make sure of their facts. It took the police a little bit of time to sort of get the intelligence together. But I've been fulsome in my praise of Bedfordshire Police. Of all the the wonderful things they do for us in protecting crime, they are also freers of slaves, and that is a pretty wonderful epithet, I think. But it just took time, unfortunately, to build up that intelligence picture because it's not visible, as I said.
Trafficking. This it's happened. One of the young men was trafficked last September. He was a student in Luton, and these local business people took advantage of him. They paid him £1 an hour, and he worked 80 hours a week.
Right.
In like small business shops, and So, what are the plan for these businesses to tackle about this exploiting these young people coming over, whether students or migrants? And my second one is like grooming for Asian men. It's not only it's happening with the white Caucasian girls, also Asian girls as well.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to be tackled. It's been happening not just only now, it's happening since 70s or 80s. You can see in the media that what's that guy? He died. So basically, it's happening quite a long time. But I mean, it needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
These two issues, very, that's why I'm interested about this trafficking.
Yes. Okay. So, well, thank you. Two really good points there. I mean, I think the business point is a really key one. I mean, if you pay your workers nothing or very, very little, you have a very powerful advantage, don't you, over legitimate businesses who are, properly and rightly paying at least the minimum wage and looking after their staff properly and paying taxes and national insurance and so on. So, it is really important that as customers of businesses, perhaps as competitors of businesses who think you might be undercutting you, we have to help the police build up the intelligent picture. I mean, one business, can't take action against another business, but if they suspect something is going wrong, or customers of that business suspect something is going on, alert trading standards, talk to the police. If you ring the wrong organisation to start with, I'm sure they will signpost you to the right organisation. But, it is something that the business organisations have a role in as well, Bedfordshire Chamber of Commerce, Federation of Small Business, and so on. But, that is illegal. It is grossly dehumanising to the people concerned, and action does need to be taken. And your point about the trafficking is absolutely right. It is not just Asian men trafficking white girls. I absolutely accept that. Gentleman here.
Hello, Liam Pickford, Senior Assistant Commissioner with Bedfordshire Drug and Alcohol Action Team. Andrew, I'm wondering, well, first of all, we have quite a spread and quite a diverse spread of ethnic communities across the county, probably more concentrated here than in a number of other areas. Within those, there are some actual communities. They're not just disparate people from other areas. And some of those communities are quite closed and private. And it's taboo to come out of the community and actually disclose that there's some kind of abuse going on. And yet, I've heard anecdotal evidence that there is some widespread abuse going on, but then again, there are some resistors to the police taking a proactive approach and going in there for fear of, one, alerting people to, well, this is a racist approach and this is because we are whatever, but also, how is that penetrated in a sensitive way without disrupting the whole community and causing chaos?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and of course we have to be culturally sensitive, but the bottom line here is, whatever the colour of our skin, wherever we come from, we're all human beings, and no one in the whole world, in any community, should ever, ever, ever be treated as you saw people being treated on that film earlier, and as I've described. So we have to be an open society, we have to be a transparent society. There cannot be no-go areas where, oh gosh, I better not go in there because I might offend someone. We've got to get above that. We are a respectful, tolerant country. People have rights. The police well understand these issues. They're very used to policing diverse communities, particularly in Luton and Bedford and in other parts of the county as well. I just think it is not acceptable to say, oh, I better not go in there in case there may be a problem, because keeping silent and doing nothing, in my view, is absolutely the bigger crime. And far better to go in and say, look, we were told something was happening, we've come in, we've satisfied ourselves that it isn't. I don't really see why people should take offence if that happens. But look at Billington, I went round it, I missed it, it was there, virtually on my doorstep, for 15 years, and I didn't realise it. So I think we've just got to get over this, and, these crimes are too awful not to investigate. That's the bottom line, I think. Yeah, Lady Lane.
I would like to hear from you, how do the agencies ensure that schools and pupils are aware of human trafficking? And how do we educate the parents to make sure that they make their children aware of this situation?
I think that's a really, really good point. And, perhaps we need to get slavery out of the history lessons and Wilberforce and get it more into PSHE as to something that is happening today and that children need to be aware of, because, children will grow up and be the citizens of tomorrow, and there's absolutely an education role. That's partly what we're doing this morning. We're informing ourselves on this topic to see how we can react better. But really, really good point. Right. Well, is your question whether some of the children in school may be being trafficked in sort of work afterwards? Yeah. 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 No, I mean...
Sorry to interrupt. I can actually help answer that question. I'm Jane Ward, the Senior Education Welfare Officer in Bedford Borough Council. One of the first signs of any problems you will often find with pupils is non-attendance at school. If any staff or parents have concerns around their child's attendance, you should be talking to the schools, and the schools know the procedures extremely well about addressing attendance matters. There is a full team in Bedford Borough of education welfare officers who can support schools with this matter, and in central Bedfordshire, and a small team in Luton still, I believe. We're very lucky in the old Bedfordshire to still have these teams, because they have disappeared in other areas of the country. But the schools are fully aware of what to do if there are attendance patterns and they fall below 85% attendance.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that.
I think actually we're out of time for Mr. Selous to get back to David Cameron.
If we could have... Okay, if we could have the PowerPoint, please. Thank you. Good morning. Welcome. It's really good of you to invite me from Hope for Justice to come along this morning and to share a little bit of our experience over the past few years with you. Fantastic number of people here. If you were to hold this in many other parts of the country, you would not get this sort of interest. You've probably worked out already that I'm Jeremy and not Emma. Emma's here this evening, and I'm the Director of Operations for Hope for Justice. Very quickly about us, we're a small charity. We're based in the north of England, but we operate across the country, and our operational teams work to bring victims of trafficking out of their exploitation. We facilitate, if we can, their entry into aftercare and advocate on their behalf in any subsequent criminal and or civil procedures. And we work very closely with police forces up and down the country. We're also a campaigning organisation trying to get the laws, and it was interesting to hear Andrew say where we are in relation to the EU directive and whatever. There is more that could be done, and we need to make sure that we really hit the mark in terms of our country's response to modern day slavery. So, what is human trafficking? Well, first thing to say, it's serious organised crime. Let's not make any bones about it. It's not a bit of petty thieving. It's really, really serious stuff. It's a modern day form of slavery, devastating lives and making considerable profits. Estimated that traffickers across the world make $32 billion a year. So it's big stuff. Could we play the DVD, do you think, please? Just a very short DVD, which will say it much better than I can. Thanks. If we can just go back to the PowerPoint. The next slide that we're going to show is the definition. It's from the Palermo Protocol, but I'm not going to go through it, you'll be pleased to know. But what today is about understanding, and I realise that time is pressing, so I'll go as quickly as I possibly can. But what we have to prove are three things to prove that someone is trafficked. You have to prove that there's an act, i.e. that they were recruited, transported, transferred, harboured, received, that there was a means, how it was done. So they were either forced or threatened, coerced, abducted, brought to this country, for example, by deception. They had payments or benefits kept from them, for example, and the purpose, i.e. why it was done, the type of exploitation suffered by the victim. The types of trafficking, very, very quickly, we've gone through it, we've mentioned them already, really. Sexual exploitation, forced labour. Andrew's already spoken about the Bedfordshire case, but you know, as he said, do think about people who are involved in tarmacking, factory work, agriculture, construction, working at the car wash that you and I take our car to regularly, no doubt. Food processing, delivering leaflets, restaurant work. Not saying, of course, that everyone involved in that work is trafficked, but our experience is that they often are. Domestic servitude. It's another case there recently where Mrs. Adenaji brought into this country a young girl as her slave, basically. A domestic slave, worked from 5 in the morning till midnight every day. And she beat her regularly, and thankfully was one of the very first people to be prosecuted for that offence. I won't go through this one. Types of exploitation. This is from the UK HTC baseline assessment. The UK HTC would themselves, I think, say that actually this is just the tip of the iceberg, and we really don't know where we are exactly with how many people we've got trafficked in this country and what the types of trafficking are. Okay, so all of you, you're here, I guess, because you are likely to come into contact with people who might be trafficked. And I'll just run through, I won't read everything on the PowerPoint, but have a look as we go through, because you don't need to prove all of these things to show that someone's trafficked. But if you come across someone who is exhibiting some of these signs, then it needs to ring the alarm bells, and you need to start thinking, is this person trafficked? There are general indicators that go across all areas of exploitation, and those are just a few there. You know, have they got their passport? Have they got their ID document? Most trafficked people won't have their documents. I'm an ex-police officer. I worked in Bedfordshire, and I'm not saying this happens in Beds, but it pains me to say that so many people we come across go to the police station when they've eventually plucked up the courage to get out of their exploitation, and they're in a homeless shelter or whatever, and the person on the front desk, they say, I am trafficked. And they'll say, are you? What's that mean then? And they'll say, well, I've had my passport taken. So, well, do you know who's got it? Yes, I think I know who's got it. Right, well, have you asked for it back? Well, I know they won't give it me back. Well, sorry, it's a civil matter. Go away and sort it out. And that happens day in, day out. That's an example of the police not really understanding what the issues are. And I'm sure that in the other disciplines that are here today, that exactly the same exists. Okay, sexual exploitation, one of the most emotive forms, clearly, and from our drama, we heard a little bit about that this morning. But if you've got someone who is moved, people who are exploited will be moved between brothels and massage parlours on a very regular basis. People that we work with, that we've come across, don't even know where they are in the country. They're moved so quickly between towns and cities, and they don't know the country anyway. They sleep on their work premises. They've often got no clothing other than sexualised clothing. They've got no English other than sexualised language. Their movement's controlled, and someone other than that person gets their money, and they see none of it. Grooming. Obviously, there are probably people here, there's clearly people in education here who are as well able to talk about this as myself. But these are just some of the things to look for. Obviously, this could be just the sign of someone going through the terrible teens, but they might also be examples excuse me, of someone who is trafficked or being exploited. Forced labour doesn't feature in the figures very much, but again, from our experience, we're seeing far more people who are the victims of forced labour now than we are the sexually exploited. You heard all of the ways in which those people kept at the Traveller site in Bedfordshire were exploited, and that happens very, very regularly with people who are victims of forced labour. Criminal activity, quite often people will be brought into the country purely to commit criminal offences. When the ID is taken from them, the ID is used to claim benefits and whatever, and they obviously see none of that money. The young person brought in to cultivate the cannabis factory, the house that's used as a cannabis factory, again, they're often the only people who come to police notice, and they're often charged and brought to court, even though that is clearly contrary to CPS guidelines and whatever. And the Criminal Cases Review Commission tell me that there are 60-odd cases outstanding at the moment where the CPS have failed to recognise that the person actually is trafficked and should never have been prosecuted in the first place. And domestic servitude, I talked a little bit about that earlier. Okay, very quickly, and probably more importantly, or as important for those of you that are here, what is the national referral mechanism? We heard Andrew talk about it and that it's there. So what does it mean to you? Well, you need to understand exactly what it is. And it is the government mechanism to get people from exploitation into aftercare and some sort of benefits. Okay. The list, look at that list. I guess most of you are fit within that list somewhere. You're a first responder, and you're the only people who can refer people into the national referral mechanism. So if you work for a local authority, you don't have to be in social services. You could be a refuse collector, actually, but you are a first responder. And you need to know, if you work for a local authority, you need to know what to do, unless your local authority has got specific procedures in place and specific people to contact to put into the NRM. Same with police. Front counter staff, often staff and not police officers, they're the ones who are going to be referring people into the NRM. They're the ones who actually need to know what to do. And everything's bureaucracy and a form, isn't it? But it's not an easy form. That's just the start. And what's written on that form is incredibly important, because that form goes to the competent decision makers in the UK HTC and the border agency. And if you haven't written exactly what has happened to that person correctly on that form, then they will not be seen as trafficked. And in many cases, they'll be completely unjustifiably on the next big silver bird out of this country back to their country of origin, where they're probably going to be re-trafficked again. So getting to know that form, if you are a first responder, you need to know that form inside out. You need to be working with interpreters, of course. We use language line and nationally accredited interpreters. But again, if your organisation doesn't have that infrastructure in place, then you really need to think about that, because almost all people that you're going to be working with won't have sufficient English to be able to give you the answers you need to complete that form. So, once someone has been referred into the national referral mechanism, then the competent decision makers will make the decision whether or not they're trafficked. And they make it on a balance of probabilities. There's an initial response, an initial decision, and then a conclusive grounds decision. And we know from our experience that if you get that form right, and you talk to the person correctly, and you get to the bottom of their exploitation, then actually it's not difficult for someone on a balance of probabilities to be seen as a trafficking victim and to get the entitlement to a 45-day period of reflection and recovery. Now, these people are almost always severely traumatized. So 45 days actually isn't very long at all. And certainly one of the things that we would be advocating and do advocate with the government around is let's make that a realistic timescale. Because those of you who are counsellors, those of you who worked with traumatised people know that it takes a very long time for people actually to feel safe and to be able to start to come to terms with their situation and to talk it through. So the person referred, the national referral mechanism is actually administered by the Salvation Army, who have the government contract. And if someone is accepted as a trafficking victim, then their 45 days of rest and reflection is spent in a safe house, inevitably a safe house somewhere in another part of the country. Not just run by the Salvation Army, but there are 11 contractors who come from both faith and secular backgrounds who run those safe houses. And they provide the aftercare, they provide the counselling and benefits advice, etc., that's needed. It creates real difficulties for police, because when a trafficking victim is working with the police, and the police have referred into the NRM, then they're going to end up in another part of the country. So as an investigator, as an ex-investigator myself, I know how difficult it is to work with victims and witnesses who are all over the place. But that's the reality, because it will never be safe to leave them near where they've been trafficked and exploited. Because as I said, this is serious criminality, and we're dealing with some of the most serious criminals that you could envisage. I'm going to finish. I've run over time already. But please be aware that people are trafficked for a whole host of reasons, and they come from a wide variety of countries. This is from the UK HTC baseline assessment, which, as I said, they would even say just sort of touches the surface. And you can see the countries, a lot of Eastern European countries, but also African countries and Eastern countries that people come from. And they're trafficked for a whole host of reasons in their country of origin. Poverty, gender issues, social, cultural exclusion, limited education, political instability, war, conflict, forced movement, social, cultural, legal frameworks. We are coming across, we are seeing and I'm sure you will be as well, a lot of people from Roma communities who are the victims of trafficking. I went on holiday once to Slovakia, and I saw how the Roma community was treated in the country of origin. So there are a whole host of reasons why people come and why they might not want to speak to people in authority. It's really, really complex area. The bottom line is, if you don't know what to do, Dave is going to talk to you in a minute about what to do, and it's really good that you've got cards produced now that many of you are going to have to tell you what to do where the victim wants to report to the police. Our experience is that a whole host of victims, because of fear of the police in their own country, or the fear of corruption amongst the police, which, as we all know, is mercifully incredibly tiny in this country, but is often rampant in the country that they come from, or they've been told by their traffickers, who know their family anyway, that if they make any sort of move to get away from their exploitation, that their family will be harmed. There are a whole host of people who do not want the police involved. You, as first responders, can still refer into the national referral mechanism without any police involvement. And if you don't know what to do, then we as Hope for Justice, as I said, we're based in the north of England, and most of our investigators work in the north of England at the moment. But by the end of this year, we're going to have a team up and running in the south somewhere, not quite sure where it is yet. And we deal with cases from all over the country, so we will always be there. We won't be there at 2 o'clock in the morning, but we will always be there. You can always ring that number and leave a message if we're not able to answer your question, and we will help you, and we'll signpost you to the right place to go. So I think it's probably best to leave it there and hand over to Dave from a police perspective.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jerry. And what a pleasure it is to see so many here today. I'm, as Jerry says, to present the police perspective, and specifically that of Bedfordshire Police. And it's going to be an opening of dialogue, really, with yourselves, because what we've seen is harrowing, but it's not something that the police can address by ourselves. We really need the help of all of you, our partners, and the public. Human trafficking, we've heard, is a crime. It's an organised crime, it's a covert crime. It operates at the margins of our society and of most people's experiences. It feeds off the desocialisation of its victims, and that means it's extremely difficult to assess its true values. I can't replicate Jerry's graphics. What I can do is offer you the picture in 2012. Nationally, referred into the national referral mechanism, there were 1,186 referrals, remaining stable from the previous year. Stable but underreporting. And that's one reason we're here, to try to address that and make sure we get a better idea of the extent of this problem. You can see the split there between females and males, adults and children, all of them victims. The picture as regards countries prevalent in trafficking, Nigeria, Vietnam and Albania were top lists last year. In Bedfordshire, locally we only had a few crimes reported, and we're aware that this is an underreporting. There were two 17-year-old females who were sent back to Somalia by their parents for sexual exploitation. A female who flew into Luton Airport from Greece to visit a female friend she had met at a church in Greece. But it wasn't her friend who met her at the airport. There was a male who drove her to an unknown location where where she was forced into prostitution with the threat of being killed if she didn't cooperate. She moved around various locations for approximately 4 years, always by Eastern European-sounding males. Until she became pregnant, she was abandoned in Glasgow. Now, our chance of rescuing victims and tackling human trafficking lies in receiving information. We might call it intelligence, but it's information from yourselves about suspected trafficking situations. Now, last year, Bedfordshire Police only received 17 pieces useful, actionable intelligence. To around females being sexually exploited, 2 by their own parents. The rest involved domestic servitude and reports of males, most of whom were the perpetrators. There were 2 vulnerable males deliberately targeted by Eastern Europeans and others who had their homes invaded and benefits stolen. What then is the law enforcement response? We heard from Mr. Selous earlier about the UK government strategy, which has 4 aims. International action to stem the motivators and enablers for human trafficking, a stronger response at the borders, tougher law enforcement, and improved identification and, importantly, care for victims. The National Referral Mechanism is an example of coordinated response. That's soon to come under the National Crime Agency, and it will bring together intelligence from agencies and partners to identify victims and ensure better treatment of them. That in turn improves the prospects for successful prosecutors against traffickers. The UK Human Trafficking Centre aims to prevent or reduce harm and protect the vulnerable by understanding the nature of the problem, raising awareness amongst frontline workers, many of whom are in the audience today, partners and vulnerable communities, and then to push that intelligence through to the police. It aims to protect victims. It's victim-focused, enabling supportive, end-to-end care, and using tactical advisors to lead investigations and to support investigations which are being run locally. The third strand is around prosecution, and by sharing good and innovative practice to develop high-quality intelligence and advice on legislation. ACPO, that's the Association of Chief Police Officers. It's launched a drive to equip individual police forces with a direction around human trafficking. This started in January this year with an awareness-raising initiative married to a Crime Stoppers campaign, and that will develop good practice in prosecution, dealing with victims. Now, we're armed with robust intelligence, and that's from the community, people like yourselves. Bedfordshire Police has been involved in some of the most exhaustive enforcement activity in human trafficking that's taken place anywhere in the country. Operation Netwing is the operation that Mr. Selous spoke about and Jerry mentioned as well, that took place in September 2011, relating to a traveller family from the Greenacres site in Leighton Buzzard. We've heard about the type of adults they were targeting, vulnerable people. As a result, 5 defendants were sentenced in July last year, and a retrial of the other defendants is taking place at the moment. We heard that they targeted people who were suffering depression and other mental health issues, marriage breakup, being homeless, or struggling to find work due to criminal convictions. Their mistreatment included, and I know we touched on it before, and this isn't a gratuitous list, but it's to let you realise what was going on under the noses of Mr. Selous and Bedfordshire Police and ourselves. These people were denied medical attention for injuries unless they were really severe. And even when they were taken to hospital, they were forcibly removed and then made to work. Beaten, slapped, scratched, kicked or punched for not getting work working too slowly, or other minor offences like that. Being made to continue to work with broken bones. Pull burning metal out of fires with no gloves. Being humiliated, locked in car boots, beaten, stabbed, stripped, or having bedclothes taken for trying to escape. Where is Bedfordshire Police then going in relation to human trafficking? Well, we're committed to contributing to the national drive to tackle human trafficking. Whilst it's against the context of significant budget cuts, Bedfordshire's vision is to fight crime and protect the public, and that remains acting on behalf of the most vulnerable in our society. We need to raise awareness. We've signed up to Crime Stoppers awareness campaign and have designed a bespoke process for capturing reports of human trafficking and child sexual exploitation to make sure they get to the best placed officers to deal with that. Now, to illustrate the current paucity of community intelligence, over the last 2 years, Crime Stoppers has received, on average, nationally, 6 pieces of information around human trafficking a week. Since they launched their campaign, this has risen, but still to only 8 pieces per week. We're using the Crime Stoppers campaign to launch awareness amongst our own officers. We are implementing awareness training amongst key frontline staff, so those most likely to encounter survivors of trafficking, those who have found the courage to escape and will be at that vulnerable stage of finally turning to authority for help. We've engaged with partner agencies, the local UKPA investigation team, UKHTC and the voluntary sector to improve our understanding of what survivors need. Already in just a few weeks, we've seen an uptake of awareness training by front desk staff, officers at Luton Airport, some of whom are here today, and its incorporation into our custody staff training, because as Jerry mentioned, sometimes these victims, the first time they come to police attention is when they're brought into custody for crime. We've raised awareness throughout the force by a series of intranet articles. Recognition of human trafficking by our intelligence process, including direct referral to our public protection unit for the immediate addressing of safeguarding issues. This has resulted in a step change of intelligence, which is now coming in almost daily. Locally, it does mainly concern Romanian women being used for prostitution, usually by fellow countrymen, and Nigerian prostitution. This has resulted in active investigations by ourselves in conjunction with the UKPA. We still need to increase our knowledge of what's happening in our communities. So how can you get into contact with us? How can you contribute? Well, as well as the traditional means of contacting us, all of which remain valid, 999, 101, we'd encourage the use of Crime Stoppers, and there are plenty of leaflets outside. But also, we've set up a process by which you can come direct to us with intelligence. I've brokered the use of a direct email link into our 24-hour intelligence bureau and a phone number as well. And if you'd like your agency or group to have this direct access, please approach me afterwards and I'll give you full details. But unless anyone requires anything at this point, I'll be happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.
So the police told me how these men groom girls so that I could start to understand it a little bit more. The lads, they all have fast cars. They're usually young, good in, and they get the girls into the cars with vodka or something like that. And then they pursue them. They give them presents, make feel special, and then they introduce them to spliffs. Well, eventually they're passed on to the older men who then introduce them to Class A drugs, and they're reliant on both of them, the men and the drugs. And the girls get called out all times, night and day, which of course cause problems with the family, which is they want. See, then they're fun ones. And us, the family, we're the bad ones. And the drugs, of course, they cost money. So the girls are sent out pinch things, and they are passed around these men, and They threatened Jessica that they would rape me and smash up our house if she didn't, she was told. And when they're giving her these drugs, these men, they tell her that they're gods, that they rule, that there's no escape. Now, I don't know what they did to her sexually, but I have a good idea. I saw letters that Gemma had written to Jessica saying what they'd done to her, and, well, they were filthy. I couldn't read them all. So after months of complaining and pleading with my MP and social services, Jessica finally went into therapeutic foster care, but she'd only been there a week when she was abducted by 2 men. And the police found her a couple of days later with Gemma and arrested her. And I think what finally pushed her to testify was apparently one of these men had beaten her with an iron bar. Now, the 2 men are in prison now, but I'll never get my daughter back. Not the way she was. So all I can do now is try and get her back on track. Just the best way that I can. Thank you.
After we had been evaluated, we returned to our room, but an hour later, the lady told myself and another girl that we would be leaving in 5 minutes with our courier. The man, who spoke poor Russian, informed us that we now worked for him. We had no choice but to go with him, and he took us to an apartment in Belgrade. An hour later, the courier returned with 2 men. He ordered us to work. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You cost me much money. You give good sex to these men," he replied. When I refused, he grabbed me by the hair and held the blade of a flick knife to my throat. He told me that if we didn't give the men a good time, he would cut my throat. The men raped us. Over the next month, we were raped by a lot of men. I thought I would never leave Serbia, but then the nice lady from the stone house turned up and rescued us. Even though I didn't trust her, she was kind to me. I'd forgotten how that felt. She told me our Italian work visas had been approved and even showed the stamp in my passport. 2 days later, some Russian men arrived and collected us along with 3 other Ukrainian girls and took us to a large lake where we were made to get into a dinghy. Eventually, we saw a cluster of lights, but then the man cut the motor. "Now, I'm going to select one of you to screw," he said. "And if you refuse to cooperate, I will drown you all right here." He chose me and raped me right there in front of the other girls. As we floated towards Albania, a surprise awaited us. Police holding machine guns. I realized that having got so close to Italy, I would probably end up in an Albanian jail. But instead of taking us to a police station, we were taken to a private house where the police took turns to rape us. I was lucky that at 22 years old I was considered over the hill, so I only spent a month at the brothel. But on the worst day, I counted 25 men who paid to have sex with me. I was to be shipped to Italy to work for men who did not care about my age. We were again transported in a raft, and as we approached the beach at San Foca, we were given our passports, a small amount of Italian change, and a card with a number on it. We were told to contact our new owners as soon as we arrived, and if we did not, we would be hunted down. We were made to jump out about 20 yards from the shore to avoid detection. I was determined that I would not contact my new owner, and if they hunted me, then so be it. So instead, I used my money to buy some bread. Recognizing that I've just recently washed up from Albania because of my ragged appearance, the lady asked me to wait while she went and called a shelter. Finally, my torturous journey had reached its end.
Is there anybody in this section who'd like to ask a question? No? Anybody in this section? Great.
Hello. You mentioned that when these people are finally rescued, they're very fearful, very mistrustful of the authorities, and they're very traumatised. A lot of them may be fearful of being sent home to be trafficked again. How do you tackle that?
Okay, that's going to that. The way that my staff deal with it is that we will go, we will see the person. It's often a homeless shelter or someone like that who contacts us and says, we believe we have someone here who might be trafficked. We'll go, I'll send an investigator and an aftercare person who inevitably has a social work background. And we just sit down and we take our time, basically. Take them to a neutral place. Absolutely no good. Take them to the police station initially, for example. Take them to a neutral place. Depends on the time of day and whatever. Often a hotel or something like that. Sit down with them and spend time with them, and just talk through and say, look, we are here to help. You explain the national referral mechanism through the interpreter. You explain what they can, the 45-day period means. It's incredibly difficult because inevitably the person you've got on that first day is hugely traumatized. So you have to spend days, sometimes a weekend. My staff will spend a weekend with someone and then refer, if this is what they want, because there's no compulsion here at all. Often people will have all that explained to them and think, well, actually, I'm better off back doing what I was doing. And we have had people who have thought, I don't want to end up in Dover, for example, to be moved from Bradford. I think I'll just carry on doing what I'm doing. But that often doesn't happen. You spend as much time as you can with them, get them into the national referral mechanism, and then we will leave them for 2 or 3 weeks, go back and visit them at the safe house, where they're often in a much better place and much better able to make a decision about whether or not they want to go down the police route or not.
Thank you.
The examples that have been cited emphasize the fear created by men in this situation. Do you find that being a man makes it more difficult for you than it would be if you had women making the initial contact with these people?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, if you didn't hear the question, it was often fear is, we've been talking about fear being instilled in our victims. By the way, I hate the word victim around human trafficking. We try and use the word survivor because it's a much more positive way of talk. So whenever we speak to people, we talk to them about surviving rather than being victims. But the question is, it's often men that instill the fear. So isn't it difficult as men to have that initial contact? The answer is yes, it is. And I, as far as I possibly can, I'll make sure that we will always have a female present. So I've only, it sounds as if I've got hundreds. I haven't. I've only got a couple of people that do aftercare. They're both ladies. And in fact, Emma, who's coming this evening, is one of my aftercare coordinators. And you're absolutely right. It's often very difficult for men to make that initial contact. Even with male victims of forced labour, we always try and have a female there if we can.
Is there anybody else from this section?
Good morning. The question I'd like to ask, the Leighton Buzzards scenario, is there any lesson to be learned? Because I was at the courthouse today, that trial was going on.
I think that I think one of the lessons for me to learn from that is the general awareness raising. At the moment I'm a consultant, but prior to this I was on a serious and organised crime agency looking at organised immigration crime, and then I worked for the United Kingdom Human Trafficking Centre. And I think you heard the MP earlier say that he'd visited the site a couple of years previously for another matter, and it wasn't picked up on. And I think that indicates possibly that there is a real general lack of awareness throughout on the issues of human trafficking. And I think a good example of that was I attended the first meeting that Kristy held last September, and there was over 30 people in the room. And the first question I asked, to get an idea of the level of knowledge of human trafficking, I asked if you could raise your hands to indicate if you'd heard of the NRM. And out of the 35 people, I think it was, one person had raised their hand, and that was a police officer. Bearing in mind that within the room at the time there was all the relevant services and agencies, just like is here. And I think that Jeremy raised it earlier about the first responders that are on that list there. And I wonder if all the people on that list and many of those agencies in them here, I just wonder if people know those key indicators, know what the NRM system is, and know what to do about it. You know, you've heard a couple of options mentioned this morning. If you spot or you have an idea of suspecting somebody is a victim of crime, not just suspecting if somebody's a victim or not, but also suspecting if somebody is an organiser of human trafficking. Although this morning there hasn't been that much time to cover every type of trafficking. In the main, you've talked about sexual exploitation. Labour exploitation far outweighs trafficking for sex exploitation in this country. And although you will hear some police forces say, we haven't got a problem in our force, and we know that because there has only been 2 NRM referrals this year, it's not necessarily the case. And it's good to see that Bedfordshire, although David's been only in post a short time, is getting some really good things in place there. And although waffling on a bit here, but in other areas of the country, what has really been seen to be successful is a real multi-agency network approach. And that's, I spoke to David earlier about it, and I think we're going to speak again later, and that is everybody who's in, say, Bedfordshire, who is connected to trafficking in any way, is actually to have a network here so that you can exchange information and spot trends. So, going back, answering that question, I think it's one lesson to learn is to raise the awareness amongst all the first responders and all key agencies.
Hello. I was recently at a domestic violence forum. I'm actually from Hertfordshire. I'm one of the seroptimists, so we get involved with things like this. And I raised the issue of trafficking and what we were doing as seroptimists to raise awareness of trafficking. And really, the view of the Domestic Violence Forum was it was completely out of scope of the work that they were doing. And I understand, you know, their resources are limited. I can understand why it's out of scope of what they're doing. But there are crossovers. And do you think that's an area where something could be done to improve things?
Thank you. You're very right that there are crossovers between human trafficking and many other areas of exploitation in our society, whether that be domestic violence or child exploitation. And that's something we're trying to address by having a presence around human trafficking in things like local safeguarding children's boards and recognising that as an issue. I'm encouraged that the independent domestic violence advisors are here as well. And I think it's through forums like this where we start bringing in people who are involved in other aspects of exploitation that we can start working in a more cohesive way and drawing trafficking into those other responses.
Thank you so much for coming.